This chapter verse is in 15, and it's verses 1 through 8. And Jesus is explaining to his disciples who Jesus is and why he came to do what he did for us. And it begins, I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit. And he prunes the branches that do bear fruit so they will produce even more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. But if you remain in me, my words remain in you, you may ask for anything you want, and it will be granted. When you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. This brings great glory to my Father. So what this story told me was when I first got into youth ministry, it's been about 9 years. And the two stories that I'm going to share happen to be about youth ministry that changed me. And when these chapters were given to me, I had no idea that how God would orchestrate it, but 2 out of the 3 stories I'm going to share tonight are based out of John 13 through 15. And it's only how God orchestrates things. So, do we have the picture to show? Okay. This isn't the one, but there was a picture that I had taken on my very first youth experience, and it was a tree with a chain link fence between it. That's the one. Thank you. Thanks for that. So on the right-hand side, you can see the tree is completely dead, cut in half by a chain link fence, and vines and branches and leaves coming out the other side. And what that represented to me was, in my very first experience with youth ministry, was that right side of that picture was me for a really long time. I was dead. There was a chain link fence between me and the vine and the growing branches. And here I am on my very first experience, and I see that. And I see that. And I said to myself, I need to be the green side and not the dead side. So it also told me that that chain link fence was all of the things that were holding me back. My addictions, the things I felt about myself, that how can a living tree on one side and a green branch on another side, separated by a chain link fence, would prevent me from growing in the Lord. So I just wanted to share that picture because it had so much impact in my life. That picture, like I say, it's about 9 years old now. But what it represents is just what I shared to you about the Jesus verses. That your vine can grow. Jesus will prune your tree. He will prune the good stuff from the bad stuff. And he will let you forget about those chain link fences in your life. And in that experience, I knew I had something about youth ministry that I had never met an 8th grade boy on this trip. It was our first night after small group time, teaching lesson, music. Then we got into small group time. The young man had the ability to come up to me, who he only had met maybe 6 hours earlier, and shared his story about his addiction to pornography. Needless to say, I was hooked at that moment to do what I'm doing. And I just thank God that I have that opportunity to share and to get people away from what things that are holding them back. So in my first point, this is the first point of my evening discussion, love yourself in order that you may love others. You know, we use the word love all the time. I love a good movie. I love my sports team. I love my coach. I hate my coach. I love a good book. I love my music. I love the band. And we use love as a very, very, very passive word. But love yourself in order that you may love others. I encourage you to this next passage. We talk about we need to love ourselves first in order to love others. So in John 15, my verses aren't really going to go 13, 14, 15. So those are the ones that that like it to go in order. It's not going to happen that way tonight. So John 15, verse 12 through 17, and this is the NLT translation. This is my commandment. Love each other in the same way I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you slaves, because a master doesn't confide in his slaves. Now you are my friends. Since I have told you everything the Father told me. You didn't choose me, I chose you. I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruits, that the Father will give you whatever you ask for using my name. This is my command. Love each other. So what Jesus is doing in this environment is he's talking to his disciples. And again, I'm a little out of sequence on what's going on. But in chapters 13, 14, and 15, these are the last days before Jesus dies. And that love that he's going to show with his death on the cross is for you and me. So he's talking to his best friends. He's talking to his disciples about what love is. And he's talking about what promises can come out of that love by doing what he asks and what you do for him. And this is my command, love each other. The one item I wanted to stress after we're done tonight, I want us to remember that love is sometimes an emotion, but always an action. It's not how we feel, but what we do. So my second point, as we get into this lengthy amount of verses, but there's a reason for it, so I'm just going to work my way through it. Point 2 is humble yourselves in order to love others. So not only do we have to love ourselves, but we have to humble ourselves to serve. And part of my story, this is the second part of my story about church and camp and the experiences that I had. The following 2 years, we went to a different camp, and I wasn't familiar with the way that this was going to get structured. But it was a camp called NTS, so short for Never the Same. But when we got dropped off in the parking lot, there was a girl, I'm going to guess she was 7th, 8th grade. Her name was Alicia, all by herself, not dressed like everybody else, off to the side, crying, scared. It was her first camp experience, and you could just tell she was that girl. She was there by herself, not a lot of friends to support and love with her. So I went over and I asked her her name. I asked her her situation, and she really got to know me fairly well even before we left the parking lot. But in that short amount of time, I found out that her parents didn't support her going to church. So she literally went to church on her own, took herself to church. She lived in downtown Grand Rapids, and we had a sister campus down there, so she rode her bike or walked, but she got herself to church. I then went on to find out that her parents didn't support enough about church. She had to come up with her own money to get herself to church. So I'll finish my story about her in a moment, but what this all relates to, again, is in John, beginning in, now we're back to chapter 13. But it's the days again before Jesus is going to die. And it's there in the room, and Jesus has all his people with him, and he's talking about ceremonies, and this is where he talks about washing feet. And it begins, it was just before Passover. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So, for those that are familiar with this verse, Jesus went around and he literally got down on his knees in front of his disciples and washed their feet. And in those days and times, only the slave did that. And here you are talking about Jesus, the master, the teacher, the main rabbi that his friends listened to and watched and wanted to become like. And then before his death, he literally washes their feet. And they're amazed. Jesus knew the Father had put all things under his power, that he'd come from God and was returning to God. So he got up for the meal and took his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet. Peter, which hopefully some of you know who Peter's the main guy. Peter is his go-to guy. Peter was his biggest advocate. Peter was his loudest voice, closest friend. And he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," Peter said, "you should never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Until I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Peter said, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." And Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath and only to wash their feet, their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew he knew Peter was going to betray him. And that's why he said not everyone in the room was clean. So Jesus, knowing what was going on, that not only Peter was going to deny him 3 times, there's another gentleman in the room who we'll talk about in a minute, who is literally going to betray him and sell him for money so that he could fulfill the prophecy, but he also was one of his closest friends in there. "I'm not referring to all of you. I know those I have chosen, but this is to fill the passage of Scripture. He who shared my bread has turned against me. Very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me." And all of his buddies looked around and said, "Well, gee, Lord, who is that?" And they wanted to know which one. And "Lord, who is it?" And at that time, "It is the one whom I will give a piece of bread, who I've dipped in the dish." Then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. And as soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered him. But Jesus still washed his feet. So not only do we have to love people, we're going to love the ones that are going to turn us away. They're the ones that are going to deny us. They're the ones that are going to pretend that they don't know us. So in this message, Judas is going to take the money in order to betray Jesus. Dan, if you could come back up, please. And then it goes on that Jesus predicts Peter's denial. When he was gone, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself. My children, I will be with you only for a little longer. You will look for me, just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I'm going, you cannot come. And a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another." And it finally wraps up in there in the story that Jesus is right. Peter, his best friend, when he was arrested, Peter was the one that denied him 3 times, but yet Jesus still decided to wash his feet for his love for somebody. So to finish my story about this NTS camp, all week long, Alicia and I were kind of buddies. On the way down, I asked her to sit up in the front seat in the van because no one wanted anything to do with her. They didn't know her. They didn't like the way she was dressed. She was different. But poor Alicia was going on camp for a week, not knowing a soul. And all I did was express an interest in her. And in doing so, I needed a co-pilot. I need someone to answer to the text messages if they come through. So Alicia and I became buddies pretty instantly all the way down. But at the end of that camp, just as Jesus is washing the feet of his disciples, this camp has a ceremony where they'll have communion, and then they'll also have a foot washing ceremony. So as we're closing up for the week and we're all tired and we've all had a great time and we all learned and grew, we're standing out in the cement pavilion, and from across the area when the foot washing ceremony was to begin, Alicia comes towards me. She didn't have any other friend. She only was there because I was nice to her. And what I encourage you all to do is that's how simple it is. Be nice. Love people that aren't loved, and it will come back to you. In this last picture, the one that was up a second ago, part of also what was special in this ceremony was that's my stepson, Jeff. He happened to be at the same camp as I was with a different church. But we also had both of his daughters, my granddaughters, were at that camp as well. But it was just a special moment for him and I to share love for each other by going through this ceremony of washing feet. So you may not physically or get down on your knees and wash somebody's feet like they did in those days, but spiritually, in your heart, you can do that with people that you're not wanting to do that for. Simply love, simply serve, and in some cases, don't expect anything in return. My final point, submit yourselves to Jesus. So I don't have the words on the screen, but John 14, verse 1 through 4. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Jesus' words here. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and I prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the place. You know the way to the place where I'm going. Jesus is telling you, do what he did. Do what I do. Love those that you don't want to love. And following up with this in the last part of my message here, John 14, verse 5 and verse 6. And this comes from the Amplified Bible. And I liked it because it was pretty much cut and dry. There is no gray area in this translation. Verse 5 says, Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going, so how can we know the way? You might ask that question too. You might have Thomas's voice in your head. Jesus said to him, I am the only way to God and the real truth and the real life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Pretty simple. Pretty simple. And finally, very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. What he's telling us is that he's empowering each one of you to do greater things than his disciples, because we have the message, we have the glory of the entire Scripture to share with our friends. Do greater things than I did. And I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask me for anything in my name, and here's his promise, and I will do it. So in closing, I just want you to encourage each other. I want you to encourage yourself. that there are things that we make us uncomfortable, there are things that we don't like, and it doesn't always go in our favor. But what does go in our favor is Jesus' support and love for us. And all he's asking is some pretty simple questions. So just as I had that experience with Alicia, I challenge you who are going to camp this week, find your Alicia. Find her. There are people there that need your love. There are people there that are going to go and be scared, but find her, and it'll change your life. And again, the final thought for me, just to share with you, is just remember that love, it's sometimes an emotion, but it is always an action. And it's not how we feel, it's but what we do.